Does it start with philosophy in secondary?
Yes, that's the handout. Okay, good evening, and thank you to Carolyn and Howard Grabo for hosting us this evening. So this is the sixth in the series under the aegis of the Kehilah of Riverdale, and classes on Rambam's Sefer HaMadah, Maimonides' Book of Cognition. So we're going to talk about the final halacha of the fourth chapter, which is very radical. We'll get to that in a minute. And we're going to talk about the fifth chapter, where you'll see there's a real change in the nature of the discussion. So as we've been talking about since the last time, there's a reason why this book was burnt. Perhaps at the request of Jews who opposed it, although by Dominicans who were trying to stamp out heresy among Christians, and then extended that to the Jews as well. There's a reason why it had so much opposition, and why to this day it is not really integrated into the study of Maimonides within traditional contexts. And the main reason I want to say is not any specific view that Rambam has about the soul or anything like that, although some of those are quite radical as well. It's the very project of the book. Right, so we've seen that the project of the book is to change the standard curriculum of Jewish study. And that is the third rail of Jewish politics. Changing the curriculum, and in particular, displacing the Talmud, which has been at the center of Jewish Torah study for well over 1,000 years. Right. So Rambam is a master of the entire literature, the entire rabbinic literature. He knows the Mishnah, on which he wrote a commentary already in his youth. He clearly knows all the halachic midrashim. He knows the Talmud, Bavli, and Yerushalmi. And having spent all those years on it, he wants to make it unnecessary for other people to spend the same kind of time on this material. First of all, he thinks it's very difficult to master, and it's very easy to get stuck in Talmudic discussion and not really get through the labyrinth. So, number one, he wants people to really understand the material. And he wants people to understand it also in not only in a theoretical way, but in a practical way, so they know what to do. But there's a second reason, which is more radical, which is that, in his view, at the culmination of Jewish study should be philosophy. And if you are required to master the Talmud, Bavli, before you ever get to the study of philosophy, you will almost never get there. Very few people will get there. Right? So instead, he wrote this book, he summarized everything. It was an enormous labor, and it shows, as I say, tremendous mastery. In no sense is this disrespect for oral Torah. Huge amount of labor. But then you should use this book, he said, and you'll know what you need to know. And then, if you're capable of mastering that, you can go on to philosophical study. And we've seen that he identifies the two traditional topics with which Jewish study culminates for the few who are capable of getting there with philosophy. Namely, Maaseh Bereshis, the account of the creation, he says, is physics. Maaseh Merkava, the account of the chariot, which traditionally would have dealt with Yechezkel's vision, and so on, and with God's governance of the world, is metaphysics. And we're going to see more about that in a second. Right, so the chapters that led up to this point, right, chapters 1 to 4, really dealt with those matters of physics and metaphysics. He gave us a summary of cutting edge but elementary physics and so on, and at least the basic elements of a proof of God's existence and the existence of the spheres and astronomy and so on. So now, the very last halacha of chapter 4 is one of those things which the traditional commentators who came after the Rambam greatly regret him ever saying, as we will see. So this is number 13 of chapter 4. Right? So he's just explained that this is how you achieve love and fear of God. So this is on the handout that you have with the text. It's the first thing.
Number 13.
Yes,
The top.
right at the top.
The regular head.
First
This
one.
one.
Look at the first
Yes.
The same Hebrew.
Okay,
The
but
other one.
one. Right there.
Wait, do we have the, did we get two of
It's
them?
at the top.
if you have the full copy, then it's page 15.
Oh, that's what I was thinking.
Yes. Okay, so he's explained this is how you achieve the love and fear of God by studying physics and metaphysics, and you will be inspired with love and yearning for God as the infinite cause of the world. And then you will also be filled with fear and trembling, not of fear of punishment, but humility. Okay, so Halacha 13, Yud Gimel. V'inyonei arba prokim elu, the topics discussed in these 4 chapters, Sheb'chamesh mitzvahs elu, connected to these 5 commandments, Heim shechachamim arishonim korino so pardes. These are what the early sages collectively called pardes. Same word as paradise, meaning a garden or an orchard. As in the passage from the Talmud Bavli and Chagiga, 4 went into pardes. And I gave you that text in the handout, right? Famously, there was Ben Azai, Ben Zomer, Acher, or the other, a name for Elisha ben Abuya, and Rabbi Akiva, all very famous early sages, and they went into the pardes. That is to say, they delved into these very profound and difficult matters, and only one of them comes out unharmed. Right? So they are warned. The exact meaning of the warning I'm not going to go into, and there are various ways to explain it. And clearly Rambam's way is not going to be the same way that everybody else has, right? But the 4 go in. Rabbi Akiva says to them, when upon your arrival in the upper worlds you reach pure marble stones, do not say water, water, and so on. And then Ben Azai glimpsed, we don't know what he glimpsed, but he died. Ben Zoma also glimpsed, and he was harmed. And Acher, Rabbi Elisha ben Avuya, chopped down the shoots of the saplings, whatever exactly that means, but he cut off the roots of faith and became some sort of heretic. Rabbi Akiva, Yatzava Shalom, he came out safely. He's the only one. So there's danger in this study. So that's what Rambam is referring to here. So he goes on to say, V'afal pi shegedola Yisrael hayu, and even though they were great ones of Israel, the Chachamim Gedolim hayu, and they were great sages, lo kulam haya behen koach leida ulehasig kol advarim al buryan. Not all of them had the capacity to know and grasp these subjects clearly. So this is emphasizing the importance of the proper capacity and preparation. And even these great sages didn't have it. V'ani omer, and I say, she'ein ra'ui l'tayel b'pardes, elamishin ismale kreisa lechem b'basar. I say that it is not proper to stroll or dally in this orchard, in other words, to go into physics and metaphysics, except for someone who has already filled his stomach with bread and meat. What does that mean? Lechem and basar, when I say bread and meat, hu leida ha'asur v'hamutar. That means to know what is forbidden and what is permitted. Uchuyotza b'hem mishara mitzvahs. And similarly with all the other mitzvahs. And although he doesn't go into it here, in the Guide of the Perplexity explains that, of course, in addition to the halachic study that you have to complete, you would have to first have the proper philosophical preparation as well. In particular, you'd have to study logic, and you'd have to master your own ethical disposition, a matter that we will get to later on in the book. Right? So without having taken all those steps, studying these matters is dangerous. Now, you've got to remember the other side of that, which is that he's already told us quite a lot, even though he said it was only a little bit, a drop in the ocean. Still, he's told us quite a lot, and some people would say too much already in the book. And we'll come back to that in a minute. So there are always two sides here, warning about the dangers and the need for preparation, but also encouragement that everybody should get as far as they can. Even though these matters, that is to say, the halachic matters of what's permitted and what's forbidden, were called a small matter by the sages. He's going to explain that in a second. Shahari Amru Chachamim, because the sages said, Davar Gadol Masei Merkava, Davar Katan Havayas Labai Varova. A great thing means the account of the chariot, and a small thing, these are the discussions of Abaye and Rava. So the discussions of Abaye and Rava, those are two of the great Babylonian sages, and those are the a lot of the substance of the Babylonian Talmud. So when you start to learn Talmud, you very often start with Baba Metzia, and especially with the second chapter. And one of the first things you encounter is this long dispute between Abaye and Rava, but about lost items and whether it's possible for someone to give up ownership even without knowing, and so on. These disputes of Abaye and Rava, that's what you study when you study the Talmud Bavli. And as the Rambam understands it, that is minor compared to the study of metaphysics. Minor in terms of value. Nevertheless, Rambam says, we're going to look at the source for this in a minute, Afal Pi Kain, Ru'uyin Hein Lagdimon. Nevertheless, you should study them first. So you have to study those disputed matters, not necessarily in the Talmud Bavli. You could study them in Rambam's much easier to understand code before you study physics and metaphysics.
So it's not really intellectual training, it's more the practical knowledge.
Yes. For the intellectual training, let's say you have to look at the Guide of the Perplexed, and where he describes in great detail the steps, especially the study of logic, that would be required before
But it's
you...
not like people say now, if you study Gemara, you'll have that's important because it'll be intellectually rigorous and you'll sharpen your mind.
Right.
He's saying, no, it's not about that. It's, just know the facts, so to speak.
Right.
And then you can get more of a philosophical training.
I think that's right. Okay. So you should study these things first. Shehein miyashvin daitoshel adam Kehilah. Well, so this is his explanation, right? That they settle they bring composure to the mind first. So I guess it's a question of how to understand that in terms of your question. That seems to be, maybe that is not just a practical matter then. Composure to the mind. It sounds like I don't think it's a training, but it's a question of the security of having that knowledge of how to behave, let's say.
It's grounding, I guess.
Yes. And furthermore, they are the precious boon bestowed by God to promote social well-being on earth, in order to obtain bliss in the world to come. And we haven't talked about that yet, but we've sort of hinted at it, that too is an intellectual matter, but you wouldn't be able to study philosophy if you weren't first settled with respect to your behavior, and if you didn't live in a society that was essentially peaceful and civilized. And the Torah provides us with rules both for our own personal behavior, and it creates a social environment that makes it that privileges study and makes it possible for people to have the social peace that enables them to study as well. And it's possible for everybody to know these things. And this is an important statement, I think, right? So these halachas that the Rambam codifies in Mishnah Torah are possible for everybody. Physics and metaphysics, not everybody's going to grasp, But the halachas of what's permitted and what's prohibited, everybody can study. Katan v'gadol, right, whether young or old, ish v'isha, man or woman, baal lev rachav or baal lev katzar. Somebody with great intellectual capacity as well as someone whose intelligence is limited. Everybody can study the Mishnah Torah and understand the halachas. So, what is so controversial about this statement? Let's have a look at the handout, and you'll see number 2 on the handout, the text from the Gemara from Talmud Bavli in Sukkah that Rambam is citing. This is Kafches Amud Aleph 28a. Amru alav al Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. The sages said about Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, Shelo hiniach mikra u'mishnah Gemara halachas va'agados, that he never neglected scripture, Mishnah, Gemara, right, which would be the explanation of the Mishnah, the halachas, the agadas, that is to say the non-legal matter, dukdukei Torah v'dukdukei sofrim, the minutiae of the Torah and the minutiae of the scribes, kalim v'chamurim, both the light matters and the more serious matters, gzera shavos, the hermeneutic inferences, tekufos ugamatrios, both the calculations of the astronomical calculations of the calendar and the numerical calculations. Sichas Malachei Ashares. These are interesting. Don't ask me what exactly they are. It's not really the topic, but right. The conversations of the angels. Right? Sichas Shedim, the conversation of demons. Sichas Dekalim, that's in many ways the most interesting one. The conversation of the palm trees. Right? Mishlach Kovsin, Mishlach Shualim. Mishalos Kovsin, Mishalos Shualim. The parables of launderers. Apparently launderers tell good stories, from which there's much to be learned. And the parables of foxes. None of that actually matters for our purpose, but he knew everything that there was to know, and he never neglected it. Davar gadol v'davar katan. That's the end of it. That's what we want, right? Both the major things and the minor things. So that's the tradition about Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. So then the Gemara is inclined to ask, so what's the big thing and what's the small thing? And it goes on to explain, Davar gadol ma'aseh merkava. The major thing is the account of the chariot, and Davar Katan Havayas Abaye v'Rava. The small thing is the disputes of Abaye and Rava. Now, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai lived a long time before Abaye and Rava, so it doesn't mean that he knew their discussions. It means the sorts of things that they were concerned with a few generations later. For him, that was minor compared to Maaseh Merkava, which was a major matter. So for the Rambam, that's very straightforward, and it fits with his values. Right? The study of the chariot, which is metaphysics, that is major in terms of value. Whereas the halachic matters over which Abaye and Rava disputed, and which is the major substance of the Talmud Bavli, that is minor in comparison in terms of its value. Although, as he said, in terms of chronology, you have to first learn what is forbidden and what is permitted, including, presumably, the things that Abaye and Rava disputed. This is not the way most rabbinic commentators have read the Gemara in Sukkah. Because to say that would be to say that there's something that's more important than the Talmud Bavli and the things which it typically deals. So how have they mostly read it? So let's have a look at number 3 on the handout. So this is from the commentary of Rav Yosef Karo, codifier of the Shulchan Aruch. But it's his commentary, Kesef Mishnah, on the Mishnah Torah. So he wrote commentaries on the major codes, the Mishnah Torah and the Tur. And he is quoting here from other people, but I think he's summarizing what the standard view was by the time he's writing in the 16th century. It says, V'kosav Haran. So Rabbeinu Nissim of Girona wrote, Davar Katan Havayas Abaye v'Rava. The small thing are the disputes of Abaye and Rava. Perish, explanation. Mishum de meikara amar shelo hiniach mikra u'mishnah. Right, at the beginning of this statement about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, it says he didn't neglect scripture, Mishnah, etc., etc. Kehilah avoyas Abaye v'Rava dava katan. So, in that context, it calls the disputes of Abaye and Rava a small matter. Why? Lefisha ein safek shehatanoim harishonim, because there's no doubt that the earliest generations of the rabbis, the Tanoim, and that includes Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, hayoyodim haMishnah al Burya. They knew the Mishnah inside and out. Right? So havoyas Abaye v'Rava, the disputes of Abaye and Rava to have a basahachi, which come later on, right? Those would have been davar katan chashvin lahu. They would have considered that to be a small matter, because their knowledge of Torah Shabbal Peh in the earlier generations was so great. They would have said to Abaye and Rava, "What are you arguing about? It's obvious." Right? So the traditional rabbinic commentary, although this is after the Rambam, was that it's not that it was minor in value. It's that because of the decline of the generations, what was a big deal to Abaye and Rava and to a later student of the Talmud Bavli would have been child's play to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Different interpretation altogether. Rambam kasaf mashe ratza. Maimonides wrote what he wanted to write. V'halavai shelo nechtav. Would have been better if he hadn't written it. Became Pirush HaRitva, and similarly the Ritva, Reb Yontif ben Avraham Asvili. So this is 13th, 14th century Spain. Reb Nissim was, Rabbeinu Nissim, the Ran was from Catalonia, now illegally declaring independence. And the Ritva was from Seville, hence the last name. Right? He explained it similarly. And he concluded, Aval davar gadol hu mikol chachmas ha'olam. That even if you want to say that the disputes of Abaye and Rava are a small thing, still that doesn't mean that they're small. They're bigger and more important than all of the other sciences or wisdoms of the world. V'zeh pirish emes hu. This explanation is true. V'lo kamish pirisha acherim, not like other people explained it. The Rambam himself. V'ha'elohim yichaper ba'ad ad kan lashana, and God should forgive them. Right. So you see how the commentaries have a really hard time with what Rambam said here, and they wish he could have taken it back. But if it's not just a minor point, because it really has to do with the mission, the project of the book as a whole, of the code as a whole. So I don't think it's a small matter.
Is it because they disagreed with the premise, or because they were afraid how this might be perceived or misperceived by people who will take things in their improper?
I think both, but in the first place, yes, they disagree with the premise. They disagree entirely with the premise, and no doubt for them, Maaseh Merkava didn't mean metaphysics anyway. Mm-hmm. Right? It meant some much more traditional area of study. It didn't mean philosophy. But even so, they're worried about it. And clearly what you see from the Ritva is that they want to get away from the Rambam's fundamental idea here, which is that the foundation of religion, including Judaism, is universal and nothing particular to Jews.
Yosef Karo was also a Kabbalist.
Certainly was.
So
yeah,
it's very threatening what Rambam was saying.
Yes.
In that way.
Threatening to whom?
To the whole agenda of Kabbalah.
Yeah.
The Zohar.
Right. So, the whole idea of Kabbalah as a tradition, right, I think really comes, although the materials existed before, but the idea that we have a tradition, I think becomes to be emphasized and gets publicized in response to Rambam, because Rambam is precisely denying that there is any such authoritative tradition.
But it's also when you're conveying Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai, and you're talking about it in the context of a universal type of, as opposed to something that's national and specific to the Jewish people, it's very threatening to a Kabbalist.
Indeed.
So, because the relationship with God is very different than what he's proposing here.
Absolutely.
So, it seems like that would be incredibly dangerous to the future of the way in which Torah is taught, because if we abandon that, then the whole thing goes belly up if you go universal.
Yes, right. That's definitely their view, that the foundation has to be a particular foundation, even if it has elements that have some universal significance, and that's completely in opposition to Rambam's view. And yet you see that all these people took Rambam very seriously, couldn't avoid him as a halakhic authority, and wrote commentaries on his work. Okay, so now we're going to move into the 5th chapter. And there everything changes. So far, everything has been universal. There's been nothing specific to Jews, even though we've been talking about the content of the commandments that were given at Har Sinai, at Sinai. With the 5th chapter, we get something that is clearly distinctive to the Jewish mission. So the 5th chapter begins by emphasizing it. It's the first time you even get a mention of the Jewish people. Right? First halacha reads, Kol Beis Yisrael, all members of the house of Israel. First time that's been even mentioned. Mitzuvin al Kiddush Hashem HaGadol Hazeh, are commanded concerning the sanctification of this great name. I want to emphasize the demonstrative there. This great name. In other words, this is going to be distinctively Jewish, but it's not disconnected from what came before. This great name refers to what we've already read. Right? So what I want to say is that we're referring back to the idea of God as the infinite ground of reality, both physical and metaphysical. But the shame, we haven't said anything about the name of God till now. Now, again, there are Kabbalistic ways to understand that, but Rambam doesn't say anything about the name of God in that sense. Name in Hebrew also means the reputation, public reputation. And I think that's what Rambam has in mind, that Jews have a specific obligation, a mission, to publicize to the world the sanctity of this infinite ground of reality.
Can I just ask you something?
Yeah.
So it seems inescapable that Ram, the way you're qualifying this year, it seems like Rambam is actually just following the trajectory of the Torah, of the Bible, where everything starts that way, and then you get Abraham, and then you have the Jewish people.
Yes.
And he basically is rewriting
Yes.
Mishnah Torah, kind of, like truly rewriting, the way you just pointed is truly rewriting it, so that it's like bringing home the point that there's this universal message that we always have to go back to, but we have to carry the torch, but don't forget that the mission is exactly the mission that the Torah set out to be. And that's why you don't need rabbinic literature, because the truth is, I'm going to take care of that for you right now.
Yes. That's a great insight. Right. The Chumash, the Pentateuch, begins with the universal. It begins with the God of creation. And begins with all of humanity being created in the image of God. And only later on does it come to, as you say, to Abraham, who has the mission to share that knowledge, and eventually the Jewish people with the special law given to them by means of Moshe. And you're right, that's the order. Yeah. So here we've got a sixth commandment, Shneimar, as it says in Vayikra v'nikdashti b'sot b'nei Yisrael, I will be sanctified among the children of Israel. And I would emphasize the among the children of Israel. This is public. I don't think it's limited to the children of Israel, but it does make a difference to some of this, the laws of Kiddush Hashem, whether you have a congregation, which will mean 10 adult males present or not. So what we're going to see now is, first of all, a specifically Jewish commandment. And secondly, we're going to get very quickly into practical matters. We haven't said anything practical. Now, I think this is cognitive as well. Everything up to now has been purely cognitive. Just about how you have to think, what you have to know, how you have to believe. Now we're going to talk about, yes, sharing that knowledge with the world, but it's going to very quickly have practical repercussions. And the question is why, right? So there's a positive and a negative commandment, right? So the positive one is, to sanctify God's name. Umizharin, and they are warned, shelo lechalalo, not to profane God's name. Shenem avalo sechalu Hashem kodshi, as it says also in Vayikra, in the same place, nor shall you profane my holy name. So that's important that there's both a positive side and a negative side, which will come up. Ketzad, and then now he asks the practical question: how? How does it work? And we didn't see that with any of the other things, although we saw how should you acquire love, but that was a cognitive issue about studying. Here he's asking, how are we supposed to act in a way that fulfills the positive and negative commandments? And I think it's very interesting. And immediately he's going to talk about persecution. And I think one of the main reasons for that is you have to remember Rambam lived in a time of extreme persecution. And he mentioned that already in the preface to the book. That's one of the reasons why study of Torah is in a desperate situation. Right? We had the Almohad rebellion, which eventually swept through much of North Africa and Iberia. The Almohads took over Cordoba in his youth. Jews were forced to convert to Islam. Rambam and his family had to live as Muslims until eventually they got to another part of the Islamic world where situations were more tolerant and frankly more traditional. The traditional situation in Islam was to tolerate Jews as a people of the book. The Almohads were unusual in that respect. So eventually in Egypt, he's living openly as a Jew. And he's very sensitive to that. And this discussion of sanctification of the name, he had already addressed in several places. And he has a couple of open letters on the matter to communities and individuals who are dealing with very difficult circumstances, including forced conversion. And he has experienced this firsthand, and he is furious in some of the letters with people who are not sensitive to what people are going through. And we'll see that he's very sensitive. Okay, so Ketzad, how are we to do this? Kashiyamod oved kachavim. If an idolater should arise, v'ye'enos es Yisrael la'avor alachas mikol mitzvahs ha'amuros b'Torah, and force a Jew to transgress one of the commandments which are mentioned in the Torah, o yahargenu, otherwise he'll kill the Jew, ya'avor v'al yehoreg, then you should transgress and not be killed. Shene'emar, the mitzvahs, it says with respect to the commandments, asher yaseh osam ha'adam v'chai b'hem, which a person shall do and live by them. This is the other reason why I think we have to get into practical issues. There's a conflict of values here. The first and foremost way to sanctify God's name is by living a life according to the commandments and embodying this cognition. But there are circumstances of persecution when you're even threatened with death, and then you have to know how to act. So you have the value of life, but clearly there's also a value sometimes of giving up your life to show the value of this cognition. How are you supposed to negotiate that? We should remember, by the way, that for Rambam, Islam is not idolatry. So it will be a slightly different practical issue anyway from what he's describing here. But he says, if an idolater should force someone to transgress or be killed, then in the first place, without further discussion, and we'll see the exceptions in a minute, you should go by the value of life. You're supposed to live by the commandments. You have to transgress. And one of the guiding principles of Rambam's sensitivity here is that coercion means that you're not responsible. Okay, there are going to be exceptions. But fundamentally, if you're coerced, that's not your fault. And he wants to put that first. And he's addressing this in many, I think, in many senses, to the people around him in his world who are faced with these circumstances. Because otherwise, it's not clear that this is the logical way to start. Okay, so velosha yamus behem. It doesn't say that you should die by them; you should live by them. V'im meis v'lo avar, and if you decided you'd rather die rather than transgress, harizeh mischai b'nafsho, then actually that is your fault. You will be sinning if you gave up your life when it wasn't really necessary in a circumstance like this. So I think that's immediately an expression of his sensitivity to people who are forced under persecution to do things that they would rather not do, contrary to Judaism. No. Right. That would be the wrong... Right. To think that you're being more stringent or more saintly by giving up your life would be wrong. Okay. Now, there are exceptions to this, however, as he goes on to describe in the second halach. What are we talking about here? B'shar mitzvahs, all the rest of the mitzvahs, the commandments, chutz me'avodas kachavim, v'gili aros v'shvichus damim. 3 famous exceptions, and this is already stated in the Talmud, right? Which are idol worship itself, sexual impropriety, and murder. And he doesn't explain this, but I think the reason is pretty straightforward, which is that these are really contrary to the most fundamental principles. Right? So idol worship is obviously against the principle that we saw in the first and second mitzvahs of knowing that God exists, proving that God exists, and not even entertaining the thought that there's another God. And the other 2, which are sexual impropriety and murder, are violations of the image of God. The human being was created in the image of God, and was created in two modes, right? Male and female. So to violate either the image of God by killing somebody, or by behaving in a way that is incompatible with respect for the male and female dimensions of the human being created in the image of God, this is tantamount to idolatry. It's a violation of the divine. Aval shalosh averos elu, but these 3 transgressions, im yomalo avor alachas mehen o tehare. If someone said to you, transgress one of these or else die, then yehareg va'al ya'avor, then you have to die rather than transgress. Right, so that is a major exception to the first point that was made. So in this case, the commandment of sanctifying God's name and bearing witness to God's existence as the infinite ground of reality takes precedence over the other statement that one should live in accordance with the mitzvahs and thereby sanctify God's name. In these cases, you have to allow yourself to be killed. I should say, be killed. It's in the passive. Now we know that among the Ashkenazim at the time of the Crusades, there was different practice, which was to actively kill oneself rather than go into this. That's another issue which I'm not going to discuss. Rambam does not consider that possibility. He's talking about passively. Somebody else wants to kill you. He's not talking about taking your own life. Okay. So what exactly are we talking about? Now we're talking about a situation so far where the idolater in question only intends to gain some benefit from your action. It tells you to commit some sexual impropriety or go and kill his enemy or whatever it is. Right? But his motivation is entirely self-interested. But there's another case, right? So in this case, Kagon she'amso livnoslo beisa b'Shabbos. Suppose he told you, build a house on Shabbos, or levasho lo tavshilo, cook him something on Shabbos when you're not allowed to do it, or anas isha leva'ala kiyotzav v'zeh, or he forced a woman to have relations with him, and so on. But if the idolater's intention is lahaviro ala mitzvahs bilvad, his intention is to get you to violate the commandments, not to get some benefit. He wants you to do this act to repudiate God, then it's a different story. Right? Im haya beino lebein atzmo, If it's private, there's nobody else around. Ein sham asarim Yisrael. There are no 10 adult males from the Jewish people there. So it's not public. And again, remember, the sanctification of the name is in the midst of Bnei Yisrael. So there's a public dimension to it. If it's private and there is no community around you, Ya'avov al Yahoreg, then you should be, you should transgress and not be killed. But if the purpose was to violate the ordinances of the religion in the midst of 10 Jewish adult males, then Yahareg ba'al Ya'avor, you should commit the transgression rather than suffer death. Even if it's not one of the 3 big ones, right? Even if it's just any old mitzvah. Right? So we've got 2 different.
Any old mitzvah, Yarov Val Yavor in that case?
Yes.
Because in front of 10
Maybe now I
people.
shouldn't have shot them.
Right. I mean, that seems to be what he's
Yeah.
saying here. Right.
That's
So
crazy.
so we have so far 2 exceptions. Right. In general, you should live rather than die. Okay. But here's exception number 1. If what you're told to do is one of the 3 big sins, which is a violation of God or of the divine image in the human, then you should give up your life rather than transgress. That's in a case where it doesn't matter what the motivation of the person doing the coercion is. Whatever their motivation is, even if they just wanted you to do it for fun or for whatever, it doesn't matter. But the second case is where the motivation of the coercer is to get you to violate God. In that case, it doesn't matter what they tell you to do. You have to, in public, then you have to be killed rather than transgress, but in private, no.
But in the first case, with the first 3 items, does it have to be in public?
He doesn't mention
It doesn't
public
mention.
there, so it seems not. So there it's the intrinsic content of the act that is the problem, and has nothing to do with whether it's public or not. There's a third exception, and this is the third halacha. All the foregoing applies to a time free from religious persecution. So this is a case where you got one particular person who's coming along making you do these things. But now suppose that there's a general persecution going on, as there was in Rambam's day, right? And suppose that they want to stamp out Judaism altogether, right? Aval b'shas hagzeira, at time of persecution, v'hu sheyamod melech rasha k'Nebuchadnezzar, when an evil king like Nebuchadnezzar, Rechabe Rav, and his confederates arise, v'yigzog zera al Yisrael levatel ta'atzam o mitzvah min ha-mitzvahs, and they make some decree on the Jewish people to annul their faith, their religion, or any particular mitzvah, then Yehareg v'al Ya'avor, then you have to allow yourself to be killed and not to transgress. Afil alachas mishar mitzvahs, any of the regular mitzvahs, not one of the big 3, whether it's private or public. So that's a third exception. So there too, as with the 3 big transgressions, it doesn't matter whether it's public or private.
This goes against the Gemara.
Okay, it goes against,
Because the Gemara says very clear.
yeah,
Yarov Val Yavor for the 3.
right.
And very clearly, V'chai b'hem, and everything you can violate. Unless you say that with those conditions, it's avodah zarah, and that's why.
Yes.
But then to qualify it as any other violation, that's not true. It's really avodah zarah, and that's what he's saying, not to violate it.
Right. But for him, idolatry is an important prohibition because of the cognitive aspect, right? Because the service of other gods involves the recognition of other gods. So here, because performing any transgression
Right.
in accordance with the motivation of somebody who wants to go against God
That's what it
is a cognitive recognition. It's giving in to the recognition of other gods or to the failure to cognize God. that's why he reads it this way. I wouldn't say it's contrary to the Gemara, but he's going to extrapolate from the Gemara in accordance with his principles.
Because he holds, basically, if you call it, like, talking about that, it's like a Avodah Zarah.
Yes.
And that's why. So then it's really a Avodah Zarah.
Okay, but
But the Gemara would never say that.
the
Gemara would
acknowledgement
never
of
say-
other God. So Avodah Zarah, technically, idolatry is the service of other gods. For Maimonides, this is less. It's very serious, but it's less serious than the intellectual recognition of other gods. Right?
Isn't the third exception a bit of a paradox, though?
Why?
If the one who wants you to transgress, his motivation is specifically to get you to go against God,
Yes.
then you should die rather than do it, which will still eradicate you and your beliefs. So
Well-
it's almost self-defeating.
But it's an act of martyrdom. And martyrdom is itself a sanctification of God's name when it's properly called for. Right? The word martyr comes from the word also to witness.
But
so-
if no one is left,
Well, right.
then the motive of
Sure.
the person causing this has
Yes.
been fulfilled.
Well, that might happen, but in the third case, it may be private, but I think the thought is that first of all, you shouldn't go against these principles, and secondly, it may be that your willingness to die will have some effect, and that will be also a way of teaching the lesson that's important.
There's somebody left to teach you.
That's for sure, yes. Okay, so those are the three exceptions then. Yeah. Let's have a look at the fourth halacha. Kol mi shenema bo ya'avov al yahareg. In any case where somebody, we said that they should transgress rather than be killed. Again, this is his sensitivity to the situation. V'ne'erag, but that person is killed, below avar, rather than transgressing. Harizem is chayav b'nafsho. He's repeating what he said earlier, right? That you would be responsible for giving up your life. In other words, in that case, the fact that you were under coercion does not excuse you. You should have lived. You should have chosen to live. And here's the reason for repeating it, what he says next. But anybody where it says, in one of the three situations that we talked about, you should be killed rather than transgress, and you were killed, v'lo avar, and you didn't transgress, harizeh kidesha es Hashem, you sanctified God's name. V'im haya ba'asaram Yisrael, and if there were 10 people, adult males of Israel, harizeh kiddush Hashem b'merabim, then you sanctified God's name in public, like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, and Rabbi Akiva b'chavirav, and his companions. For Eluhain Haruge Malchus, these are the martyrs who were killed by Rome. In the case of Rabbi Akiva, She'ein Ma'aleh Amalason. There's no degree greater than that. Ba'aleim Ne'eman, about them it is said in Tehillim, Yelecha Haragnu Kol Hayom Nechshavna Katzon Tivcha. For your sake we're killed all day long. We are accounted as sheep for the slaughter. But it is for God's sake. Ba'aleim Ne'emar Isfuli Chasidai. It also says in Psalms, gather my pious ones or my saints together, those who have made a covenant with me by sacrifice. So this is like a personal covenant with God. Somebody who was in a situation where they should have allowed themselves to be killed rather than transgress, but they transgressed. We haven't discussed this yet. That is profaning God's name. So it's not just that you failed to do the positive commandment. You actually did something that was forbidden. There's a negative commandment saying, don't profane my name. So that's what you did. And if there were 10 adult Jewish males there, then you profane God's name barabim in public. Ubitel mitzvahs aseh, and you both annulled a positive commandment, which is Kiddush Hashem, ve'avar al mitzvahs los aseh, and you transgressed a negative commandment, Kehilah Hashem. Okay, but we're getting to the punchline here. because none of this so far is that surprising. But Aval PK, notwithstanding all that we just said, because this person transgressed under coercion, ein malkinoso, we do not give him corporal punishment.
He's dead already.
No. This is the person who didn't.
Didn't.
Chose to transgress when he should have allowed himself to be killed. Such a person does not get any punishment from the court, the rabbinic court, right? That person is left alone. They did the wrong thing, but it's not up to us to punish him. But ain't sarch loma she'ein mamisinoso, and obviously, given that you don't give corporal punishment, we certainly don't give a capital punishment for Bezdin in the court. Afilu harag ba'ones, even if this person went and killed somebody else, because he was told, you go and kill that person or we'll kill you, and he went and did it. It was wrong, but we don't give him capital punishment or any other punishment. And this is a very important principle that the Rambam says. Right? So even though he's very clear about what we need to do, he's very sensitive to the fact that many people in his day are not able to withstand these demands and are going to transgress, sad as that is, and they will do the wrong thing, and one should have mercy on those people and not punish them. This was not the attitude of everybody. If you read his letter on Kiddush Hashem, he's very upset with another rabbi who's not named, who was asked about it by people who were living under the Almohads. And even though it wasn't exactly idolatry, they had to nevertheless appear to repudiate Judaism, and they had to express their faith in Muhammad and so on. And they asked a particular rabbi, so what is our situation now? What should we try to do everything that we can do? It's very hard for us. And this rabbi said, no, you shouldn't do anything Jewish now. And in fact, if you do something Jewish, if you do any commandment, that's a disgrace to God. And basically the story was, we don't want anything to do with you anymore. Rambam is infuriated by this approach, and he says it's completely wrong. He says, anything that you can do under your very difficult circumstances, God will appreciate, and we will appreciate you. And when you're able to move and get to a better place, you have to do that. Don't tell me that, well, you've got a good job and you don't really want to leave. If you can get out of that country, you should get out. But while you're under these very difficult circumstances, you're not going to be rejected either by God or by the rest of the Jewish people. And that's really to do with this principle that he asserts here, that even if you did the wrong thing, if you did it under coercion, you're not held responsible in the court. So I think that's an important principle. And he tries to prove that here. So he goes on to say, She'ein malkin umamisin elol over birtsono. We only give corporal and capital punishment to someone who sinned intentionally or voluntarily, uva edim b'hasra, and had witnesses and was properly warned in accordance with halacha before doing the act and so on. She'emar b'nosei mizara l'molech, because it says in the Torah with respect to somebody who gives their children to Molech, some kind of child sacrifice cult. Right? B'nasati ani esponai be'ishahu. God says, I will set my face against this person. Pia Shmuel lamdu, and we learned in the oral Torah, hahu lo anus v'lo shogeg v'lo muter. We're dealing with a situation where a person was not doing it under compulsion and was not doing it in ignorance or in error, but only in a case where they did it knowingly and voluntarily and so on. That's where God sets his face against you. That's when God rejects you. And if this is true of idolatry, which is very severe, more severe than the other prohibitions, that God will only reject you if you did these things voluntarily and knowingly and so on, right? Then clearly it's going to be the case in lesser cases as well. right? Then ha'over osa ba'ones einu chayav kores. In a case like that where it's under coercion, you don't get to be cut off. Ve'ein tzarich l'ma misas bezdin, and obviously you don't get to be killed by the court and so on. Kal v'chomer, how much more so l'shar mitzvahs hamoras b'Torah. The other mitzvahs of the Torah must be even more like that. That if you transgressed against them under coercion, you're not going to be punished and you're not going to be rejected by God, even if you didn't do the right thing, right? And with respect to sexual sins, it says, and to the maiden, do not do anything. Right? Because in that case, we're talking about rape, where there was it was impossible. We're assuming that it was impossible for this for the woman to get away or to resist. So she gets no punishment at all. And we know that there are cultures where the woman who gets raped still gets punished.
They get killed.
Yes,
Today.
right. So right. So the Torah completely rejects that, and he says the principle of the Torah is something bad happens to you, even if there's some way in which it defiles you, whatever you want to say it is. It was under coercion. It's not your fault. Obviously, if somebody was able to get away, and to flee, and to flee from this evil king, like Nebuchadnezzar, who's persecuting Judaism, and the person who's able to get away doesn't do it, well, that's something else. Now you're like a dog returning to its vomit. So you could have got away, and this bad thing happened to you, but you stayed and you chose to be in a situation where you're persecuted. Well, okay, that's already a little bit worse, right? Now you would be called an idolater who does so intentionally or willfully. And now you're going to be excluded from the world to come, and go down to the lowest depths of hell. So if you choose to stay under persecution when you could have escaped, now it becomes willful. But still, what I want to emphasize is the basic principle, which is that if it is under coercion, even though you did the wrong thing, you are still not held responsible. And I think Rambam wrote this in the way that he did out of sensitivity to the many people living in his time who were facing very difficult challenges and persecution. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.